Well, hello. Good morning. It's good to see you guys today. I'm really honored to be here. Wow, that worship was just pretty incredible. My parents pastored a church just maybe a mile or two from here across the park in the city here in St. Louis. And as we were singing that last song, I thought, I know those words, but I don't think I've ever sung this song. And then at the end, oh, there we go. All right. Actually, I discovered it before then. But it was great. It was good. It's good to be here. I love Darren Patrick. I love the leadership that he gives in Acts 29 and in the city, just doing something like this. Darren and I met, 10, 12 years ago at a meeting. I think it was in New York City the first time we met. And we were both a lot younger. And he was this kind of brash, kind of cocky, him and this other guy from Seattle that he had there with him. And so we sat down to have dinner, and we introduced ourselves, and Darren said, I don't know what, I said something, and I said, let's exchange numbers. And so I gave him his number, and he said, so if I text you, will you actually respond? I'm like, what's up with this dude, yeah? And I texted, or he texted me, I responded, and then I texted him, and he responded, and we've become great friends. I don't know anybody I respect more in ministry than Darren Patrick. I mean that, I really do. And if you guys are part of Acts 29, you are well led. And here at the Journey Church, which is fantastic. It means a lot to me just being here because of some history of my family, and what an incredible thing. I told my dad about your church and how you guys are impacting the city. Now, for those of you who don't know me, which most of you probably don't, there wouldn't be a reason to, I'm Darren's token egalitarian friend. Yeah, he tweeted that this week. I don't know if you saw that. And so if my doctrine gets out of line, he's threatened to take me hunting. Show the picture. You guys have the picture? He will climb into a deer stand with his bow and arrow, looking like a modern-day Rambo, covered head to toe in the distinctive smell of deer urine. I will be dressed as Bambi's dad and will be forced to run around yelling, "Dudes are cool," with only occasional breaks to read aloud from selected sermons by Piper and Spurgeon. That's pretty good, wasn't it? I thought of that on the airplane on the way here. Seriously, our friendship is less threatened by doctrinal issues. Aren't you glad that there's a big, broad tent in the body of Christ? And what I'm excited about is we're learning to work together. I head up a church planting network called ARC, which we basically ripped everything we could off of Acts 29 in the early years of formation. But we're co-workers in planting life-giving churches, and we're trying to figure out how we can do more with our own distinctives, but together in impacting the kingdom. So our friendship is less threatened by a doctrinal issue than the fact that he is the chaplain for the Cardinals, and I am a rabid Cubs fan. Rabid Cubs fan. I used to take joy every time we beat the Cardinals. But these days, it ain't nothing. It's like whooping a 2-year-old in Walmart. It just happens, All right. And that's all I'm going to say about that, okay? All right. So my assignment is to talk about discipleship. I think that's what you guys have been looking at over the last little bit. And obviously, it's something that's a challenge for all of us if you're a pastor. The uncracked code is leadership development. Everybody wants to know, how do you do that? And how do you make disciples? And boy, I read the list of people that you guys have had in here, and they are pretty incredible. Many of them have written books concerning that. And so what I want to do is I'm going to give you maybe just my take on the thing. It might be a little different point of view. I'll tell you what it will be. It's going to be simple. because that's kind of who I am. I had a family that came to our church recently, and I met them afterwards, and they said, we love this church. And I said, well, what is it that you love about it? And they said, our sixth grade son can really understand you. And I thought, yeah, I aim at about a middle school level. That's about what it is. But actually what we all do is we're all interpreters, aren't we? We are interpreting scriptural truth, some of it deep, and we are interpreting it to the average everyday citizen. And that's kind of who I am. I'm just kind of an average everyday guy, and so I see things from a simple point of view. Now, you don't have to agree with everything that I say. I'll tell you just like I tell our church. You don't have to agree with me on everything. You have a right to be wrong. How many of you know that? So we'll just establish that up front. My mom used to say to me, everybody's good for something, even if it's just to be a bad example. And that may be what I am in your series is, boy, I tell you, we did a thing on discipleship, and one of the guys was a real bad example. Don't go there. I'm okay with that, all right? So what I want to do, I've got, we have somebody help me with clock. When am I supposed to quit? Is there anybody know? All right, we'll just do it forever. It'll be great. We'll just kind of 10:20. Okay, somebody just kind of wave or whatever when that happens. So what I want to do is I want to kind of give you a real quick premise for discipleship for me, and then a philosophy. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on philosophy, and I want to kind of break it down as I would break it down if you were my church, and we were talking about how do we make disciples here. And then at the end, I want to give just a little bit of practice, what actually, the practical things, how maybe some things that we might discover together. And then our next session, instead of me doing a talk, they had me doing a couple of talks, I said, let's do some Q&A so that we can kind of get where we are, and we can talk about discipleship or anything else that you want to talk about. But let me give you the premise. Here's my premise. I believe that maturity, and that's what we're wanting to do. We're wanting to bring those who follow us into maturity, right? Into the mature man or woman of God. I believe that maturity is measured not by what you know, but by who you love. That's just me. It's not by what you know, it's by who you love. Knowledge is necessary. We need to know God. We need to know the Scriptures. You need to know your craft. But knowledge tends to puff up, honestly. 1 Corinthians 8, verse 1, now about food sacrificed to idols. We know that we possess all knowledge, but knowledge puffs up. And love builds up. The next part of the verse says, knowledge puffs up while love builds up. And so I always default back to when we're trying to make disciples at Seacoast, it's not about what you know, especially in the information age that we live in today. It's easy to get knowledge. It really is. It's out there. It's all about who you love. And so you measure it by how are you loving God? How are you loving those who are close to you? How are you loving those who are different than you? And how are you loving those who don't like you? Those are kind of four areas. How are you doing with loving God? How are you doing with loving those that are kind of in your circle? How are you doing with those that are different than you? And how are you doing with those who don't like you? And so the premise is measured, maturity is measured not by what you know, but by who you love. And we'll apply that just a little bit later. The philosophy. And here's like the one phrase philosophy that I apply to discipleship, and someone I am trying to disciple, is this: you were made for more. You were made for more. Let me spend some time on this. You're my church. Let me preach to you for just a few minutes. Have you ever had a time when you had a feeling that you were made for more? It may have been during, a real difficult season, and some of us may very well, probably are. There are some of us in the room today that are in a difficult season right now. And, it could be going through a relational hardship, financial hardship, biting sheep. Have you guys noticed that sheep bite? Some of them are rabid. They have a taste for shepherd, and those can be very difficult times. You might be going through a difficult time right now, and late at night when it's just you and God, and you go, you know what, I'm made for more than this. I really am. I'm made to be more than a punching bag, for somebody who has anger issues. I'm made for more. Or it could be on the other end of that whole scale when you've had a breakthrough in your life, and maybe somebody helped you with that. Maybe it was somebody that was discipling you, and they pulled you into something greater than you thought you could do. And at the end of the day, you went, you know what? I am made for more. I can think of a lot of I think about one of the first ones is I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and my dad, I saw a Bronco deal right there, and I was so blessed. I really was. That's awesome. There's a man of discernment there. But my dad loved sports, and so he would take me to all kinds of sports activities. He loved wrestling, not the pro kind, the kind where high school kids do. And I'd go watch the state championship wrestling match every year, even since I was just a little crumb cruncher. And so I had a dream of someday being a state champion. And I won that title many times in my room, wrestling my pillow or whatever. And I started wrestling when I was in about the 5th grade. By the time I was in middle school, just getting into high school, 8th grade, I was on the varsity team, and the overall varsity. And I remember 2 coaches. One of them I'll call the voice of less, and the other the voice of more. The voice of less was the assistant wrestling coach, assistant football coach, assistant baseball coach, driver's ed teacher, and PE, teacher, physical education. You guys had guys like that, excited about everything they're doing, but not a real high IQ. And so this guy was, I used to love PE because I could get a good grade there, all except for like 2 weeks during the year in Colorado. I don't know if they do this where you're at, but you had to learn to dance. And, not just any dance, it was like square dancing or something. And that ought to be a middle school guy's, delight. It's an opportunity to legally touch a woman. But for me, it was a terrible time because I grew up in a little Pentecostal church. My dad was a Pentecostal preacher. And we had a whole long list of things that we were against. We weren't real clear what we were for. You understand? But we knew what we were against, and dancing was one of those. In fact, let me tell you how big it was. We were opposed to premarital sex because we thought it led to dancing. I mean, that's... I got a couple of jokes on that are pretty good. I'm thinking about telling, but I don't think I should. But anyway, whatever. So my dad would write me a note. Anytime I went, during that time, I had to excuse me from square dancing, if you can imagine that. And it didn't excuse me from the room, It wasn't like I could go to a study hall or something. I had to sit on the front row of the bleachers while all my buddies ragged me about that time. And I could handle that. I had big shoulders. But what I couldn't handle was the day that my coach picked me out for some reason. Having a bad day, I don't know what. And he said, Surratt, you have a dream of being a state champion. I'm 8th grade at this point. You have a dream of being a state champion. You will never. If you can't do this, something as simple as this, you will never. And I remember going to bed at night thinking, I will never. The voice of less, the voice of less. Then there was the other coach who was what I call the voice of more. He was the head coach. And that year, we were a fairly new school, so we had never won a wrestling match in the history of our school. We were getting better and closer, but we'd never won yet. And that year, we're coming down to the end of the season. We're wrestling the best team and all this kind of stuff. And so he gets us together the night before, and he says, guys, we're going to win. He said, I want you to put your hands in. We're going to win. I want you to say 1, 2, 3, win. And he could tell in our eyes that we weren't quite there. We're thinking we probably will win, but this is probably not the line that we draw against the best team in the conference. So he says, I have a plan. And he went through his plan. He said the first 4 matches will be about even. Last matches will be probably even. He said, where we're going to win it is in the 5th match, which happened to be my match. And the guy that I was wrestling against is a defending champion. He hadn't been beaten yet this year. And he said, Surratt is going to beat this guy. He said, I've been watching him. He's going to beat this guy. And when he does, it's going to demoralize them. Our fans are going to be excited. And we're going to ultimately win first match in the history of our team. So I want you to put it in here, and let's do it. And they put it in 1, 2, 3, win, and we were all over it. And I'm over here going, well, I know Surratt, and I'm wrestling on varsity, and these guys are, older than me and all this kind of stuff, and I'm not so sure. And he said to me, I believe in you. And I've watched you practice. I've watched you bust your butt. He said, it's going to come together for you, and I believe it's going to come together tomorrow. So I went to bed that night, voice of less, you will never, the voice of more, you can do this. And the next day, I could build it up and all that, but I beat this guy. And it was the first, and we went on and won. The first match in the history of our school that we won. And now, I wouldn't have told you the story if I'd lost. You guys know that. But I can remember afterwards thinking, voice of more. And then I remember when I won a state championship the next year, and I brought the brackets into Mr. No's class and said some things I shouldn't have said, and then repented and found Jesus, and now I'm a preacher. Okay, and so that's my story. But we all have those breakthrough moments, but we settle into less. And Jesus made this statement, obviously, you guys know this, about his mission. He said, I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. I believe if you're a Christ follower, you are made to experience life to the full. You're made for more. You're made to overcome negative habits, to be emotionally healthy, to make a difference in other people's lives, to walk in healthy, loving relationships, to receive answers to prayer. You are made to live in confidence. Who wouldn't want that kind of life? But here's what's true. You guys, a lot of you are pastors, you know this. Very few people, even pastors, walk in a discipled life of more. And why not? I think it's a spiritual battle that began in the Garden of Eden and goes all the way through the Old Testament, and it's a battle for our thoughts and our mind, because we live most of our mind right here. It's the way we think. We get into the New Testament and we see Jesus. And it's the same battle, and Satan, we see him in the garden on that Thursday, battling for the thought life and the future of Jesus Christ. And Jesus says, not my will, but yours be done, after begging the Father, is there any way that this cup can pass from me? And then on the next day, Good Friday, anything but that for him. It looks like hope has died, less wins, but we know the rest of the story. And I love Matthew chapter 28 records the resurrection, and a lot of the other Gospels, go through a whole bunch of stuff, Jesus meeting with this one, that one, the other one, and basically in Matthew 28 gets right to the end. It just jumps right to the chase, and at the end of the chapter is obviously the Great Commission. We're all familiar with it. But I want you to look at it as last words, because last words are important. Some of you just put your kids in school, and when they go for the first time, or maybe they go to college, especially college, we have 18 years to train them up in the way that they should go. And we try to cram the last 5 minutes. Do this, don't do this, don't go here, be careful about this, last words. You have last words of Jesus, and this is what I base my discipleship theory on. The discipleship philosophy is on Matthew 28, verse 18 through 20. Because I think it gives Jesus intent. It says, Jesus came, and he told his disciples, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And teach these new disciples to obey all the commands that I have given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And I think in those passages, I'm going to break it down real simply. I think it gives what we were made for, what a disciple is made for, and will help us, as I'm going to show you a little bit, in how we can make disciples of the people that we lead. It says you were made, number one, to submit to the authority of Jesus. Just practical stuff. You were made to submit to the authority of Jesus. Everybody in this room, we would agree with that. I'm preaching to the choir. Everybody in the neighborhood, everybody in St. Louis, everybody in the United States, everybody in the world was made to submit to the authority of Jesus. He says, all authority has been given to me. Now, here's the question. What does it mean to submit to the authority of Jesus? And here's what I think. I think it simply means this. Believing the voice and words of Jesus over any other message. Okay? Believing the voice and words of Jesus over any other message. Throughout the course of your life, there are going to be dozens of people who are going to tell you what you can't be, what you can't have, what you can't do. And I'm going to suggest Jesus will not be one of those. Okay? He's not going to be the voice of less. I believe he is the voice of more. Here's what he says about you. In John, we could do a big long study on this. I won't do it. Let me just point out 2 or 3 verses. John 15:19. Again, last discourse. You know the deal. It's the Jesus sitting down at the table, the Last Supper. He's got this, and fortunately Leonardo da Vinci was there, so we know what it looked like. But he's sitting down and he's giving the guys instructions, marching orders. He's going away. This is what you got to disciple all nations. Here's how you're going to do it. And he says in John 15:19, he says, "You are loved. I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love." I was talking to Darren last night that actually I think it was on a podcast yesterday for Acts 29. He said, "What if you're going to tell pastors 3 things, what would you tell them?" Maybe we'll get to that later. But one of them was, you need to understand that you are loved by the Father. That when you're a pastor, we don't work for favor, we work from favor. It's the inheritance that they sang about in the worship time. We don't work for an inheritance, we walk into our inheritance in the Lord. And you're loved, and if you don't feel loved, and boy, there was a long time when I was pastoring that I was working out of this kind of gotta do mentality. If I did well, the Father loved me more. That's exhausting. That's not Jesus. He said, you are loved. If you don't feel love, it's not because God doesn't love you, it's because we're not thinking right about it. We are loved. And then he goes on and he says, you're chosen. You didn't choose me, I chose you. I mean, you guys know that. Yeah, good. I'll leave that alone. And actually, I believe that. I believe that 100%. He says, you have a purpose. John 15:16 said, I appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit. A lot of the people that we will disciple, and us, because we're disciples, they'll feel like, man, I'm in a dead-end job, or this is a dead-end situation, whatever. There are no dead-end situations in God. I love that verse in Acts somewhere where it talks about the fact that God knew the times and the places that everybody would live. He created Adam and all the people afterwards, and he knew the time and places they would live. I think it's Acts, is that Acts 17 or something like that? It's a good verse. And so that, the next verse, so that some would come to know me, would come to know God, would come to know Jesus. And so he appointed us to produce lasting fruit. I usually talk about it like this. A lot of people say, I've got to go get a fresh start. I'm going to move, whatever, and sometimes that's okay. But the problem with moving to get a fresh start is that I come with me. And I am the problem. So rather than moving, how about dealing with me? And so you have a purpose. So God appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit. And that's the disciples that you're making. And he also says you are forgiven. Here's where I'm going to get really off into heresy, and you guys can clean it up later. I'm fine with that. He says you are forgiven. He said if we confess our sins to him, he is faithful and just to forgive our sins and to cleanse us from all wickedness. I don't think. Here's the deal. Here's the deal. Most disciples that I've had over the years get stuck here in really understanding that God is the voice of more and Jesus loves them, all this, with this whole forgiveness thing. And it goes a couple of ways. One of them is, hey, I've done something so bad. You know the deal. I've done something so bad, 3 years ago or three weeks ago, whatever it happens to be, that God, how can God forgive me? But more often it's like this. It's like, the first time I asked God for forgiveness, I got it. Felt really good. But then I did the same thing again. Anybody here ever sinned more than once on the same sin? Okay. And second time, okay. Fourth time, 15th time, I'll just go ahead and walk in condemnation, because if I was God, I would not forgive me. Newsflash, you're not God. Okay? You resign as general manager of the universe. He's doing just fine. And I don't believe the Bible says, now this is where heresy comes. You guys can clean it up later. You guys love doing that. So I don't think you have to ask God to forgive you. That's not what it says. Because if you do, then you're going, well, maybe he will and maybe he won't. No, he decided to forgive you in Jesus at the cross. Okay? The choice is, am I going to confess my sin? If I confess my sin, and maybe we'll talk about this later at our church, we have opportunity for that every week. It's a big deal. If I confess my sin, he is what? He is faithful and just to forgive me. The question isn't, will he forgive me? I don't even think you need to ask that. Because it's given. It was given in Jesus. What you do is confess your sin. And I think that's good. But if it's not, who cares? Okay, so you were made to submit to the authority of Jesus. You can listen to the voice of less, or you can submit your life to the voice of more. Which coach are you going to listen to? You're made for more, which means listening just to the voice of Jesus, who I believe is the voice of more. I'll tie it together in just a second, discipleship. Here's the second thing he says. He says you were made to participate in the strategy of Jesus, which is what? To go and make disciples. You are important. Everybody here and in your church is important to the strategy of Jesus. You may have been a surprise to your parents, but you're not a surprise to God. How do you know that? There are unplanned pregnancies, but no unplanned people. It's real hard to surprise an omniscient God. How many of you are aware of that? He's never had a day. He's never had a day where he woke up. He didn't wake up anyway. He's awake all the time. But he's never had a day where he said, gee, I didn't see that coming. Now, this is a preaching point. I'm going to leave this alone, but I want to give it to you because there's somebody here that needs this. If that's true, God's omniscient, and he's never been surprised by something that's coming. There's something that's a surprise to you right now that's not a surprise to God. And if it's not a surprise to God, he's at work on the solution before you ever knew there was a problem. And that's true in your church and in your family. This is a principle I learned several years ago. I won't tell you how at this point, maybe later. But it's been powerful. And it's true of everything in my life. It's true of the strategy of discipleship. Go and make disciples. Now, in churches, sometimes they say, isn't that what we pay you to do? And I explain it like this at Seacoast. No, everybody is in full-time ministry. Some people are in vocational ministry. I'm paid to be good. You're good for nothing. It's just kind of how we explain it to our church. So here's the payoff. What does that mean to go and make disciples? If submitting to the authority of Jesus means that I listen only to the voice of Jesus, which is the voice of more, then go and make disciples means, follow me on this, I become the voice of more in somebody else's life. Does that make sense? And then I teach them to listen to the voice of more. I become and I teach them to listen to the voice of more. Now, we've ingrained it in our culture. I was telling some guys at breakfast the other day, I don't know, I was having one of those days, where I was a little frustrated with my inability to do something. I don't know what it was. And I was talking to my personal assistant. And I said, I'm just not any good at that. And she's been working with me for about 10 years. And here's what she said. Who told you that? Which was a key phrase that we have around our office in our church, which simply meant, I'm not listening to the voice of more there, I'm listening to the voice of less. Who told you that? Wasn't Jesus. Well, if Jesus didn't tell you that, it's probably not true, okay? Now, there may be some other things around it, but we teach people to hear the voice of more. So the question is, as pastors and leaders, how are we doing with our assignment? Are we intentionally the voice of more or accidentally the voice of less in other people's lives? We can all think of people who were the voice of more for us in and pulled more out of us. I want to give you one story, how this practically applies. When I think of the voice of more, I think of a guy on our staff named Sam Lesky. You know Sam. We've got somebody here. It was so good to see that was with our church when we had 300 people. I said, when did you start coming to our church? And she said, well, it's when we had potlucks and everybody came, And but Sam and Joan, Sam was mafia. And that's all I'm going to say about that. And they got saved and started going to a small group. And I was able to personally disciple him. And then their small group grew, and they became small group leaders, then small group coaches, and then pastors on staff and over small groups, and then became the campus pastor at our largest campus, about responsibility for about 6,500 people. And one day, I was driving over a bridge that you go over from Mount Pleasant, where we live, to Charleston. If you turn left and look left, it's downtown Charleston. It's beautiful. If you look right, it's North Charleston, which is really an underprivileged area of our community. And I was reading USA Today one morning, and USA Today listed like the 25 most dangerous cities in America. They do that once a year or whatever. North Charleston was number 7. Number 7. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. I know they kill each other over there, but I don't go over there. And so I just put it away. And I'm driving over the bridge later that week, I think. I felt the Spirit of the Lord saying to me, what are you going to do about that? And I thought, really nothing. We plant campuses, and we plant them in kind of suburban areas, and we do really good at this. People write books about us, and God, you really ought to read about us. That kind of mentality is what I had. Arrogant. And it just wouldn't go away. And so one day I'm driving in my car, again with a group of our pastors, and I turned to Sam Lesky, and I said, Sam, God's calling you to North Charleston. Now, when you're high on the food chain, you can do that kind of thing. But Sam started to actually cry, and he doesn't do that hardly ever. And he said, you know what? He said, I grew up in Camden, New Jersey, one of the toughest cities in America. I relate more to the people in North Charleston than I do in Mount Pleasant. Now, what does this have to do with discipleship? So we're trying to figure out, what do we do? So we planted a campus there. We did adopt a block and, just a lot of stuff like that. But we found out that the biggest problem was education. Kids, the high school there, the graduation rate was 36%. 36% of seniors graduated. And so you just had this spin cycle of poverty. And so Sammy said, we're gonna figure out how discipleship works there. And so we created a mentoring program, and the mentoring program doesn't have anything to do with math, science, and all that, because the teachers do great with that. We decided to see if we could do this right here, what I've been talking about. What if we became the voice of more in these kids' lives? What if we challenged the people in our church, if they would give an hour or two, maybe 2 or 3 hours per month, and do just normal things with them, but be the voice of more? And if they're open, teach them how to listen to the voice of more. And so we started doing that. And so today, fast forward, we're mentoring about a little over 100 students per year, and the graduation rate is 87% of the students. And we're not cherry picking. We're not cherry picking we're going to get the really smart ones. We're taking whoever. 87%. And what are we doing? Are we teaching them math and science? No, the teachers are doing great at that. They are hearing that they are worthless over and over and over again, and we're just speaking Jesus to them. We're saying, no. You were created in the image of an awesome God. Kids are coming to know Jesus. We're being the voice of more in their lives. Okay? So what if each of us decided to do that? Could we make a difference? I think so. Third thing he says is stand on the promises of Jesus, just real quickly. He said, be sure of this. I'm with you always. Here's what Jesus is saying. I think he's saying there are going to be times, if you choose to listen just to the voice of more, to Jesus, and you become the voice of more in other people's lives and train them to listen to Jesus, there are going to be times when the voices of less are going to be so loud that you're going to be tempted to forget what I've told you. There'll be times when loneliness and frustration And opposition will seem to overwhelm you. By the way, if you're a pastor, that will probably happen at some point. Discouragement is the occupational hazard of ministry. We'll talk more about that maybe in the next session. But there will be times when you may wonder if God cares. And in those moments, he says, I want you to stand on my promise, my words. Be sure of this, I am with you always. Now, honestly, would you agree it's easy to hear the voice of more when things are going well? But they don't always go well. There'll be times when the kids don't listen. And there's too much month at the end of the bills. Anybody have a testimony on that? When friends act like enemies and old habits seem to never die. And it's in times like that we need to stand firm on the promises of Jesus. I love Isaiah 49 and verse 23. Those who hope in me will not be disappointed. Listen, if you hope in a man or a woman, you will be disappointed, especially men. You're going to be not men hoping in women, women hoping in men. We will disappoint you. That's part of what we do. Now, if we read Darren's books, we'll get better. Okay? If you hope in the government, how do you know you'll be disappointed? If you're a Democrat, you'll blame, the Republicans. If you're the Republicans, you'll blame Donald Trump. Whatever. But you're going to be disappointed. But I love that. If you hope in God, it says you will never be disappointed. And one story that kind of wraps this section up. My son Josh, he's now the lead pastor at our church, but 3 or 4 years ago we were having a really busy season around Easter, and he misplaced his car. Have you ever misplaced a car? He did. He had his wife's car and his 2 kids at that point in his car. And one of them's 5, one of them's 3, and he's looking around and he's real tense. And finally his 5-year-old says, Daddy, where are we? What are we doing? And Joshua says, we're lost. We're lost. Just wanted him to shut up. To which his 3-year-old says, silly Daddy, you're here in the car with us. We're not lost. Of course, the practical application with believers is we're not lost. God is in the car with us. He's promised that he would never leave us nor forsake us. If he's told you that he'll reclaim a wayward child, be sure of this. I believe it'll happen. If he said he'll meet a financial need, be sure of this. It'll happen. If he told you that someday you'll be successful in ministry, let's define the word successful, but be sure of this, it's going to happen. If he's promised that he'll break a stronghold in your life, be sure of this. It's going to happen. It may not be on your timetable or the way that you would have envisioned it, but it will be more than you could ask or imagine. You were made for more. You were made to participate in the strategy of Jesus and to stand on his promises. Now, the premise is maturity is measured not by what you know, by who you love. The philosophy is that discipleship is about listening to Jesus, the voice of more, becoming the voice of more in somebody else's lives, and teaching others to listen to Jesus, the voice of more. So let me give you the practice just a little bit, just 3 or 4 practice things. Where are we at? We got about 5 minutes before we go. Made for More is a discipleship strategy. At Seacoast, we end every service like this. We end small groups like this. We end everything like this. Key question: what is God saying to you, and what are you going to do about it? Because it's all about voice of more. What is God saying to you? We end every service like that, small groups, everything, and what are you going to do about it? Now, in discipling the crowd, we do it in several ways. One is we preach in rhythms, and this is probably a review for a lot of us. My friend Mike Breen, anybody know Mike Breen? Mike Breen taught me about up, in, and out, that Jesus lived in 3 dimensions, his up dimension with the Father, his in dimension with, his posse, and the out dimension to the crowd. And so we preach in rhythms like that. Series, is it up? Is it about our relationship with loving God? Because it's about who you love. Is it in, about loving each other? Is it out, about loving the world? We're getting ready to do a series right now that's an out series, How to Be a Good Neighbor. And I think it's based on somebody that wrote a book kind of like that. And we're having him come in and speak. And we're doing some stuff on loving the world. I just spoke last week in Austin, Texas. They have over 300 churches doing the same series together about loving the city, which is, about loving the world. Second thing we do is response time. Our services, we have like just a couple of songs of worship on the front end, very few announcements. We have the teaching, and then we end the service with, or we end the teaching with, okay, I've taught about whatever. Now, what is God saying to you? And what are you going to do about it? Again, emphasizing listening to the voice of more. And then we have crosses and communion and candles and anointing with oil and all kinds of things that happen at the end of the service. And then the third thing of discipling the crowd is taking your next step. If God is saying, what is God saying to you? What are you going to do about it? There's always a next step. And so we have several next steps that you can take. Now, discipling the group, discipling like small group, involves first next steps. We encourage every group member, every group leader to regularly with the small group go, okay, let's talk about our up. How are we doing at loving God? Let's talk about that. How are we doing at loving each other? The in. How are we doing at loving our world? And we check that up in groups. And who can we be the voice of more to? I'm going to defer a little bit of this to the next session because there's such an incredible story. A lot of you know, most of you have heard about the 9 wonderful people that were killed in a church downtown Charleston. We are like shoulders deep in that whole process. And some really cool stories out of that come from this philosophy of who can we be the voice of more to. So maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. Then discipling the individual. In my case, several young men that I would disciple. It begins with an invitation, follow me as I follow Christ, and a commitment that I will be the voice of more in your life. And then there's the challenge, and the challenge is this. I challenge them to listen to the voice of more. We use YouVersion, like you guys are familiar with YouVersion, and we become friends in YouVersion so we can see what we're studying, when we're connecting, all that. Because it's real important. If you're going to be a disciple maker or a disciple, first thing, you got to hear the voice of Jesus. And so little things like that, I help them to discern which voice is Jesus' voice. What is God saying to you? I challenge them when they're listening to other voices. I already told you about who told you that. Well, that's a constant question. When we hear language creates culture, whether it's church culture or individual culture. So we're listening. What is the language? Who told you that? I challenge them to become the voice of more in other people's lives. And then we have rhythm checks. How are you doing at loving God? How are you doing at loving the church? How are you doing at loving the world? And then what's your next step? So anyway, that's kind of a broad overview, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. All right? Thanks.